Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I've got a chilling collection of cryptid and alien stories. Be sure to let me know down below what you think and don't forget to check out our Patreon for some ultra exclusive and cool perks. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. There's this place in the countryside where I live. I wish I could remember the name. It might have been something like Bumbleguini, though I've never been able to find it on a map. Still, it's real, and people around here talk about it sometimes, in a way that makes it sound like it should have just vanished off the face of the earth. The place isn't a town exactly, more like a patch of land. Whatever it is though, everything there is dead, and I don't mean like abandoned, I mean nothing lives there, no wildlife at any rate, no fish in the water, no bugs, no frogs, no rabbits. It's eerie and weird. See, there's this body of water there too. Not quite a lake, but bigger than a pond. Locals said it used to be full of life decades ago. You know, like bass, perch, the usual. But for years now, it's just water. Rumor is that something went wrong there back in the day. I can't remember what it was. Radiation, chemical dropped from an old military project, or a sinkhole, buried pipeline. I don't really remember. Point is, most people don't like talking about it anymore, and if you mention it, they'll just give you a weird look and change the subject. But what I do remember clearly is what happened to a guy who used to live near that area known as Billy. He was what most people in the town would call the town drunk. Friendly, mostly harmless, and usually seen stumbling around the gas station looking for beer and conversation. No one ever took him seriously. He wasn't educated. Most days he could barely string a sentence together without slurring. But one night, Billy came back into town looking like he'd seen the gates of hell. This must have been around 20 years ago. I was at the diner when he came in. His jeans were soaked up to the knees, and he was shaking and pale. You normally don't pay too much attention to what Billy says, but that night he didn't smell like booze. His hands were trembling, and his eyes locked on the floor. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low and clear, something I hadn't heard for a very long time. His story goes like this. He'd gone out to do some night fishing, like he did every once in a while. He never fished in the dead zone, obviously there'd be no point. He found a little spot about half a mile upstream from where the river still moved and the water was clear. He'd set it up just before dark, tossed his line in and leaned back on the bank with a cig. It was quiet, dead quiet. And then just past midnight he heard a splash. At first he thought it was a deer or maybe a wild pig. But then he saw it, maybe 30 feet downstream. Something was crawling down the opposite bank. It looked like a pig, he said. Same low body, same bulk. But something was different. It didn't move like a pig. Its joints bent weird, its back hunched and swayed in a way that didn't seem right. He watched it wade into the water without a sound. No snorting or splashing beyond the first step, and it moved almost gracefully, like it was used to it, and swam across with no hesitation. And then, when it got to the other side, it did something Billy couldn't explain. It stood on its back legs like a man. He said it rose to its feet slowly, long limbs unfolding from the hunched shape. Its back straightened and its arms dropped down to its sides. It didn't look like a pig anymore, not even close. It was tall and wiry, and it walked out the river like it had done it 1,000 times. It didn't look around, didn't run, didn't even look at him. It just disappeared into the tree line like it had somewhere to be. Billy sat there frozen, his line slack in the water. Finally, he snapped out of it when his cigarette burnt down to his fingers. He didn't pack up his gear, he didn't even grab his tackle box. Just turned and walked straight back into town in the dark. People didn't believe him, obviously. Some laughed it off, others said he was finally losing it, but I remember the look on his face, the way his voice dropped when he described the thing standing out in the river. I'd known Billy most of my life. He lied plenty of times about how many fish he caught, and about how he used to be a soldier. But he never looked like that. He was scared, not drunk, not confused, and not trying to show off. This is real fear here. A few weeks later, he stopped going out there altogether. Wouldn't even drive down that road. Said the whole place felt sick. Told me once over a smoke outside the store that it had eyes. He passed away a few years back, alone in his trailer at the edge of town. A few of us went through his stuff to clean up, and we found his old tackle box and a few notes scrawled inside. It just said, "There's something in the water." We all figured what it meant. I don't know if it was real, but I do know that no one fishes out that way anymore. This happened when I was about 4 years old, and I've gone back and forth over the years about whether it was real or some kind of hallucination or just a confused memory. But the thing is, it never faded. It stayed with me sharper than most other memories from that age. It felt real, and deep down I still believe it was, especially because my grandma never talks about it that day. To set the stage, this happened in south-central Arkansas, not far from the Louisiana border. We had a good bit of land, some woods, a creek that mostly stayed dry in the summer, and a big pasture out behind the property. My grandmother owned the place, and she loved taking me outside. She was, and still is, an active, no-nonsense woman who never really put up with superstition or anything like that. On this particular day, she packed us a picnic and told me we were going for just a little trek, just the two of us and her dog. I don't remember what kind of dog she was, just that she was some medium-sized, sandy-colored mutt who acted more like a person than a dog most of the time. Never barked unless she had a real reason to, and never begged for food. We headed out mid-morning, basket in tow, and walked across the field and through the dry creek bed towards the back pasture. It was a hot, still day with not a cloud in the sky. There was this big cedar tree near the edge of the back field, not quite right on the tree line, but close. My grandma always called it her favorite tree. It was wide, tall, and shady enough to be pleasant, even under the dead of summer. We spread a blanket and start eating. I was probably halfway through one of those peanut butter jelly sandwiches that come with the crusts off when the dog, who had been laying quietly beside us, started to jump to her feet. She began barking loudly and aggressively, full-on growling, hackles up, spinning in frantic circles around us. It was out of character. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. My grandma stood up fast and looked in the direction the dog was facing, towards the tree line and the creek bed that we had just walked through to get here. She started picking up the picnic stuff with one hand and using the other to grab my arm and pull me closer. She kept repeating something under her breath, too soft for me to make out, and that's when I saw it. About 50 yards away near the edge of the trees, something stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't there and then it was. That's the best way I can explain it. One moment, there was just trees and brush, and the next a tall grey figure was standing where the woods ended and the field began. Even now I don't have the words to fully describe it. It wasn't human. I want to say it was humanoid, but that feels like a cop-out. It walked on 2 legs, but it was too big, too broad. Its arms were long. The skin, or whatever covered it, was a dull matte grey with no shine and no hair. It didn't make a sound. My grandma didn't hesitate. She grabbed me, yanked me up into her arms and bolted. Our dog tore off beside us, still growling, but not stopping to bark anymore. She wasn't trying to fight it. She just wanted to get away. Now here's the weird part. I'm almost certain she didn't run back towards the house. That would have taken us across the creek into an open field for a good half-mile, too exposed. Instead, she veered left and ran towards the cedar tree. I can still remember the feeling of her holding me tightly against her chest, the jarring rhythm of her feet pounding the hard-packed dirt. She didn't speak, not even when we stopped at the base of the tree, and she finally let me down. Our dog stopped barking almost immediately once we reached it. She sat next to us, panting, ears perked, but no longer frantic. My heart was still pounding out of my chest, but I could tell the danger, whatever it had been, was gone. It was like the tree had done something. I don't know, maybe I just felt safer under it. but the moment was burned into me, the rough texture, the bark against the back, the smell of cedar in the air, and my grandma kneeling beside me, clutching the edge of her picnic basket like a shield. We sat there for a long time. Eventually, we walked back to the house. I don't remember if we talked about it or not. I wanted to say we didn't. It wasn't something we ever really brought up again, even years later. My grandma mentioned the cedar tree a few times since, always with this reverent tone, but she's never once brought up what happened that day. I tried asking once or twice and she brushed it off like I was remembering a dream. But I know I didn't imagine it. I remember the fear in her face, and I remember the way our dog acted. The dog lived to be 14 years old and never barked like that again. To this day I have no idea what we saw. Some people have told me that it might have been a Bigfoot or a person in a ghillie suit, or even just a deer standing upright, but none of it adds up. It wasn't shaggy, it wasn't brown, and it moved with purpose, like it had seen us sitting and didn't care that we saw it. It's been years now, but I still think about that day more often than I should like. I just don't know if the place was special, that part of the woods somehow, or wrong, and I caught a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see. For most of my childhood and early teen years, I had this recurring nightmare. It was always the same. There was this thing, this creature, that I could only ever describe as a lizard man. Though even that doesn't fully explain how disturbing it was. It was tall and thin, and mottled, scaly skin that shimmered just slightly. Its eyes were huge and glassy, with vertical slits that glowed faintly. The worst part was that it could see through my eyes, not metaphorically but literally. In the dream, I'd always be hiding from it somewhere, sometimes in the basement, sometimes wedged into a closet, and sometimes under a bed. It didn't know where I was at first, and I could almost feel its confusion as it wandered into the halls and roamed the outside of the house looking for me. But the second I peeked out just to check if I was safe, if I so much as cracked the closet door to look through the blinds, it knew exactly where I was. Because then it would come see what I was seeing. It would instantly turn its head in my direction and start coming for me. I'd panic, tearing out of my hiding spot and run to a new one. And the cycle would continue. Every single time, it was like I was being hunted, not chased in the usual dream sense, where you're just running and running. This felt intelligent and calculated. Every move I made, every decision to peek or breathe too loudly felt like it mattered, like it was really happening. The fear was so real that I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, checking corners in my room just to make sure I was alone. But here's the thing that still messes with me. One night, maybe around 16 or 17 years old, I randomly mentioned the lizard man dream to my dad. I wasn't expecting anything. I think we were just discussing weird dreams in general, just swapping stories over coffee. I casually said, "Yeah, I used to have this recurring nightmare about this lizard guy who would see through my eyes, so every time I peeked to check if he was gone, he'd find me again. It was like a game of hide and seek I could never win." My dad stopped mid-sip and stared at me. His face lost all color, and I mean he went ghostly white. And I could hear the hesitation in his voice before he said anything, like he wasn't even sure if he should open his mouth. Then he asked really quietly, The dream, did it happen in our old place in East St. Paul? The one with the row of the apartments behind it?" At that moment I froze. My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned that part. That specific detail, the house, the setting, had always been the same in the dream, but I never thought it mattered. I said, "Yeah, that's where I'd always end up hiding, the basement mostly in the laundry room, sometimes in the backyard by the fence, but always that house. Why?" And then he looked at me and said, "Because I have the exact same dream." I can't really explain the feeling that came over me in that moment. It was like the air changed in the room. My skin broke out in goosebumps instantly. His face was still pale, and his voice had gone quiet. I pressed him for more. What do you mean, the same dream? As he described it, the hiding, the creature that could see through his eyes if he looked out too soon, the panic of scrambling from one hiding place to the next while trying to keep a calm mind, hoping the thing hadn't noticed him yet. And always in the same house, our old house, with the peeling white siding, the narrow kitchen, the little basement, and the exposed rafters, and that damn crawl space. Even the old wooden fence out back that separated our yard from the apartment lot. We sat there for a long time, just kind of staring at each other, neither of us sure what to say next. There was no way this was just a coincidence. He had never told me that dream before, and I had never mentioned it to anyone before then. And yet we both had the exact same nightmare with the exact same creature, in the exact same place. After that night, I started to think back on that house. I'd always felt a little off. I remember as a kid I'd hate being alone in certain rooms. I'd avoid going down into the basement unless someone was with me. I used to think I was just being dramatic. But now I wonder if maybe there was a reason. What makes it even weirder is that I had never had the dream before we moved into that house, and after we left. Once we moved to a different part of town, it faded. I still had it once or twice, but not like before. It was like whatever it had stayed behind. My dad said the same thing. It stopped after we left, but he still didn't want to talk about it all that much. I could tell it shook him deeply. One time I asked him if he ever beat the dream, like never peeking out, just staying hidden the whole time. He said once he tried, and the lizard man just stood still and didn't move, didn't look around. It just waited, like it was content to stand there forever, until he made a mistake. And eventually he did. I don't know what it was. A shared hallucination, some strange family curse. I honestly don't care to figure it out. But to this day I won't talk about it unless someone really presses me. Because once you start thinking about it, I'm scared that it will come back. It was the mid-1970s, and I was 7 years old. My dad worked the evening shift at the Chrysler plant on Shadeland Avenue in Indianapolis, so it was just me and my mum that night at home. The sky had settled into that deep midnight blue of twilight, with the last hint of daylight fading before the world was swallowed by darkness. Mum had tucked me into bed, turning off my light but leaving the door open. My little twin canopy bed, with its pink and white gingham-checked pattern, sat right beside my window. As I was nestled in with my stuffed animals, something outside caught my eye. Descending from the sky was a strange, see-through craft spinning very fast, but it had no blades, propellers, or rotors. Even as a child, I knew how planes and helicopters worked. But this was different. It spun rapidly, pulsing with alternating red, blue, and green lights. It looked as if it were made of acrylic or glass, smooth, almost crystalline. It moved slowly, dropping straight down in a controlled descent before coming to a stop, hovering silently just beyond my window. It stayed there, suspended, spinning and blinking. I watched in awe, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In my child's mind, it reminded me of a Christmas light, shaped like an acorn or a spinning top without the handle. After what felt like 30 minutes, it shifted, but instead of tilting or banking like a plane would, it moved at a perfect 90-degree angle, gliding to the side before stopping again. Then after another brief pause, it returned to its original position. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. Even then, I was a pragmatic, level-headed kid and didn't make up wild stories. I knew that what I was seeing wasn't normal. But the moment that changed everything was when I suddenly realized I knew I was watching it. I don't know how I knew. There was no sound, no movement, no signal. Just a sudden, mistakable awareness that it saw me too. And the instant that thought hit me, zoom. The craft shot straight up like a bullet, vanishing into the sky at an impossible speed. I sat there stunned. My only thought was that we didn't have anything like that here on Earth. I called out for my mum, but she didn't hear me, or maybe she dismissed it as bedtime chatter. I wanted to tell her to run out of my room and explain what I had just seen, but a heavy realization settled over me. I'm just a little kid. No one would believe me. I've spent years trying to make sense of that night. I know I wasn't dreaming. I had just climbed into bed and hadn't even laid my head down yet. But the memory is still sharp. Then about a decade ago, I was watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm a huge Steven Spielberg and Stephen King fan, and there's a scene where air traffic controllers track an unidentified object over Indianapolis, a moment inspired by real-life events at the Indianapolis International Airport. As I watched, the realization hit me like a tidal wave. What those pilots and air traffic controllers saw that night, it was the exact same thing I saw as a little girl. The time, the place, the description. It all lines up. Even after all these years, I still wonder what it was, and why did it seem to notice me? This happened back in '09. I was at my mum's house for Labor Day weekend. She and her boyfriend had gone camping, so it was just me, my older sister, and her daughter staying at the house. My sister had put my niece to bed, and we were in the spare bedroom, which used to be a sunroom, so windows everywhere. We were lying on the bed just listening to music and talking. I was closest to the wall, looking up through one of the windows above the roof. That's when I noticed something in the sky. It looked like a star, but something about it felt off. It was brighter than the rest, and instead of moving across the sky, it just hovered in place, not perfectly still, but kind of floating within the same small area. I watched for a few minutes, thinking maybe it was just a satellite, then stopped paying attention. A little later, my sister got up to use the bathroom. When she came back, she stood beside the bed and looked out the window and asked, "Do you see that?" I got up and looked where she was pointing. It was the same orb I had seen before, but now it had moved across the sky and was hovering in between two trees. I checked the window above the roof where I'd seen it. It was gone from there, so yeah, it had definitely moved. We watched it for a solid 45 minutes. It was about the size of a star, if not a bit bigger, but more bright and alive. It didn't behave like anything we were used to. It hovered like a helicopter suspended there and pulsed with light. Eventually it drifted behind the tree on the right, and we ran outside to get a better view. When we looked up again, somehow, it was on the other side of the sky, still hovering and twinkling. We stood in the middle of the street. It was about 1 a.m. by then, and one of our neighbors came out. We asked him if he saw it. He said he had, and even went back inside to grab binoculars for us. When we looked through, we still couldn't make out a shape, just the light. But up close we could see it was cycling rapidly between red, green and white, which is probably why it seemed like it was twinkling. We watched it for a little longer, and eventually just called it a night. The next morning we saw a few posts online and heard from others in town who reported seeing the exact same thing. That alone was weird enough, but here's the part that sticks with me. The next day I was about to take a shower. I took off my shirt and noticed something on my side. When I turned to look, there was a mark, about 3 inches long, razor straight, dark, and completely healed, like an old scar. Not a scratch, not something fresh. Just, I'd never had surgery, I'd never been hurt. Nothing had happened the day before that would have caused it, and it appeared on my body overnight. I still have the mark, although it's faint now, but I swear on everything it wasn't there the night before. I don't know what I saw in the sky, but I've got a scar that showed up right after and no explanation for how it got there. Spoopy stuff. I guess it makes for a good party story at least. This happened on Halloween night of 2014. I was coming home from a party around midnight to my parents' house. They live in a quiet neighborhood, and their house sits about 15 to 20 feet back from the road. I had to park near the curb, and by the time I got there all the lights were off. My parents were evidently already asleep, and the whole place was pitch black. As I locked up my car and started walking across the open front yard towards the door, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There's only one large evergreen tree in the yard, off to the left near the property line between our house and the neighbors. That's where I saw it. Behind the trunk of the evergreen was something tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, pale, almost bluish white, with a hazy glow. Not bright, just faint enough that it stood out against the darkness. It had a human-like shape, but its proportions were off. It was rail thin, with ridiculously long arms and legs, and even longer fingers. No face or real features, just this elongated, vaguely humanoid figure. My first thought was that it had to be a Halloween decoration. Maybe the neighbors set something up. I stood there, keys in hand, staring at it, trying to figure out what exactly I was looking at. That's when its head started moving, not turning slowly, but twitching side to side. I didn't move. I still stood there, the street dead quiet. And that's when it moved. It took 3 long strides from behind the tree, straight towards the side of the house. And it moved with a certain wrongness, like something you'd see if you pulled a rubber band tight and then let it snap. It didn't blur or vanish. It stretched through the air and shot around the back of the house like it was gliding way too fast for a human. By the time I got myself moving and ran inside, it was gone, but there was no sound, no trace that it had even been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, especially from the windows. Every reflective surface in that house made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep much that night. I just lay in bed trying to convince myself it was some kind of costume, a prank or a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. This happened back in 2006. I was 20. It was a weekday sometime in the early fall. I had just finished work and was heading straight over to my girlfriend's house for dinner. She still lived with her mum, grandmother and younger sister, with just the 4 of them in the house. We had a pretty normal evening. I helped set the table when I got there. We all had dinner together, nothing unusual, and after we ate, my girlfriend and I went to her room. We laid around talking for a few hours, making plans for the weekend, watching TV. It was getting late, and I had to be up early the next morning, so I finally decided to call it a night. I put on my jacket, kissed her goodbye, and headed downstairs. Her house had this long hallway that passed through the kitchen to get to the front door. As I walked into the kitchen, I stopped cold. I didn't hear anything, I just saw it. There were 2 creatures in front of me, leading her little sister towards the front door. They were maybe 4 feet tall, thin as hell, with long skinny arms and weirdly long necks. They moved like they were used to doing this, silent and coordinated, and were wearing what appeared to be black, skin-tight suits with no zippers, no seams, just smooth and tight over their whole bodies. Their heads were the size of melons, tilted slightly forward, like they didn't need to look up to know where they were going. I felt completely disconnected from my body, like I was watching it happen from across the room or underwater. It didn't feel real. I couldn't move. Then another figure stepped out behind them, this one way taller, and looked completely different. He came out of the same bedroom they'd just walked out of, following behind like he was in charge. I swear to God, this thing looked like a lizard in a hooded robe. Its face was brown and leathery and scaled. It didn't blink, but looked right at me as it passed, but I couldn't read its expression. It made every hair on my body stand on end. The 3 of them, with her little sister in the middle, walking like she was in a trance, went straight through the front wall of the house, like they weren't even solid. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember, I woke up in my girlfriend's bed upstairs fully dressed. Everything hit me at once. I remembered every single detail like it had just happened. How they moved, the look of their skin, the shape of their bodies. I could feel the fear in my chest like a weight. And I shot up and told my girlfriend everything right away. She told me it had been happening since she was a kid, but no one outside the family ever spoke about it. She said it was a sort of family secret, and even admitted that was a big part of why her father left. He couldn't handle it. Later that day, we found out her neighbor had called in the middle of the night because they'd seen her sister lying naked and unconscious in the front yard, with no memory of how she got there. After that night, there were more weird things in the house. Strange sounds, lights flickering. Her sister began sleepwalking more. Sometimes she'd be missing from her bed, and they'd find her curled up somewhere else in the house. We stayed together for another year or so after that night. I saw other strange stuff, but nothing that intense. Eventually we broke up, but stayed in touch for a while. The last time I spoke to her was 8 years ago. And last I heard, things in the house had only gotten stranger. And I know how this sounds, and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I did, and I still remember exactly how it felt too. Standing there completely frozen, while 3 inhuman things walked a little girl through a wall like it meant nothing. That moment never left me. I was 27 years old, living alone in my Riverview townhouse, working as an executive chef at a local restaurant. It was my night off, and after a light afternoon of drinking, I had taken a nap. By the time I woke up, it was 9 p.m, mid-fall, already dark outside. I was hungry, and brownies sounded amazing, but I didn't feel like making them. The closest grocery store had closed at 8, so I grabbed my keys and headed across town to Walmart, taking the expressway since it was the fastest route. After stocking up on snacks and other essentials, I started my drive back home. By then it was close to 10 p.m, and the road was quiet, just a few cars here and there. With my window down, I enjoyed the crisp fall air, and that's when I saw them. Several large glowing orange orbs hovered in the night sky less than a mile north of the expressway. They weren't blinking like aircraft lights, nor did they move like anything I'd ever seen before. The highway runs east to west, perpendicular to the Mississippi River before crossing into Illinois, and the orbs seemed to be hovering in that general direction. I came up to my turning and muttered to myself, "Man, that's weird." Then it hit me. Maybe it was just the reflection of the orange highway lights on my driver's side window. That makes sense, I thought. But as I turned left towards my apartment, I froze. My driver's side window was already down. That was no reflection. A chill ran down my spine. Trying to make sense of it, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light. Determined to prove myself wrong, I circled back, heading west on the expressway, slowly creeping along while peering out of the passenger window. Nothing. I turned around, heading back east towards the river, searching the sky. Still nothing. I did this back and forth loop a few more times, changing my speed, rolling my window up and down, testing different angles. But the orbs were gone. The spot in the sky was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something, so I called the local TV station. No answer. Then, on a whim, the police station. The dispatcher picked up. "Hey, I know this sounds a bit weird, but have you gotten any calls tonight about strange lights in the sky?" Silence. Then, with an audible eye roll, "Oh, no, we haven't had any calls about lights in the sky." I thanked him and hung up. That was that. You know how people always say, "I know what I saw"? Well, I don't know what I saw, but I know I saw something. A few years later, I ended up hooking up with a girl who was really into aliens, and I don't just mean she liked the X-Files. I'm talking full-blown conspiracy theories. Lizard people, alien hybrids, government cover-ups, the whole works. One night, after we'd finished up, We were lying in bed talking, and she asked if I'd ever seen anything strange, and I told her the story. She gave me a weird look. "What?" I asked. "They aren't supposed to come that close to town," she said completely seriously. That freaked me out a little. But then again, she also thought the feds were parked outside her house monitoring her activities, so yeah, take that with an entire bag of salt, because even a single grain wouldn't be enough. My family owns a decent-sized horse boarding facility, and when we were first getting it off the ground, we'd all do bed checks together. Basically just walking the property at night, turning off lights and fans, making sure the barn doors were latched and checking each horse for injuries or blankets during the cold weather, routine stuff. This happened one fortnight after we got back from eating out. It was about 9:30 or 10 p.m. The sky was completely black and not a sliver of moonlight to be seen. We parked the truck by the barn as usual, stepped out, and froze immediately. As just beyond the tree line, near one of the side paddocks, something huge stood up. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a horse. It was this massive, light grey figure, vague in shape at first but clearly solid, bigger than anything we'd expected to see out there. I'd compare it to the size of a single cab pickup, maybe a bit taller. The thing stood up, and then in just a few loping strides, took off towards the open pasture. No growls, no breathing. It didn't make a sound except for the heavy, thudding impacts as it ran across the hard dirt and dried grass. That's what stuck with me. It sounded real and heavy, like it had actual weight, but its movement didn't match. It moved too fast for something of that size. The way it bolted didn't look right, almost like it was gliding but still pounding the ground. A few seconds later, we heard a sudden eruption from the horses. The ones turned in that pasture absolutely lost their minds, screaming and panicking full stampede mode towards the far fence line. I'd never seen them react like that, not even during storms. We hauled arse over there thinking maybe a horse had gotten out or someone broken in. We did a full count and double-checked, and every single one was accounted for. Nothing missing, no signs of injuries or blood, no damage to fencing or anything. We never found any tracks or signs of what it was. I've never seen it again, and honestly hope I never do. I still think about how it moved, that speed, the silence, the impossible size. It wasn't natural, and whatever it was certainly didn't belong with the horses. I want to share a story with you about a humanoid encounter I had. So, I'm going to start off with dreams. Most dreams have a surreal logic, where you're dragged along without control. But this dream was different. I could think clearly. I could feel the hardwood floor under my feet, even smell the old air in the house and feel my breath. This started when I was about 12 or so, around 2010. I was staying with my great-grandparents at their place at Chattooga County, Georgia. It's a rural area, not a lot of houses. Their home sat near the end of a gravel road, with only a few other homes spaced far apart. You could hear the lake from the porch sometimes. One night around 1 a.m., I got out of bed to get a glass of water. Their house was big and old, with creaky floors and long hallways. I stepped out of the room, walked down the narrow hall towards the living room. The kitchen was connected right off it. I'd done this 100 times before, but this time as I approached the living room, everything felt off. It was the light that caught me first. The room wasn't dark, but the light wasn't normal either. It was a soft yellow glow, like the ceiling light was on, but it didn't match the bulbs we always used. It felt altered and artificial, slowed down like a filter on reality. I walked around the corner and that's when I saw him. In the middle of the room stood a tall figure cloaked in black. On either side of him were two smaller figures. I could barely process them. They seemed to flicker out the second I focused on them. Vague shapes, like something half erased, or scrawled hastily into the background of a drawing. I'd recognize the smaller ones as resembling grey aliens, but in that moment, they didn't hold shape. They were just there, then gone. The tall figure, though, was impossible to miss. Facing away from me, he had to hunch to fit beneath the ceiling. His cloak ended at the height of a tall man, but when he turned around, I felt like he gained 2 extra feet. And when he turned, I felt everything change. The air itself, time, sound. He stared at me, and in that moment my body froze. I couldn't scream, I couldn't breathe. All I could register was the smell. I didn't know how to describe it until later, until my great-granddad spent his final weeks in hospice. It was the smell of death, not rot, nor blood, but death. His face was smooth and pale, no features outside the classic alien outline, a long rounded head, slits where the nose should be and a small mouth, but the eyes weren't right. They looked like they didn't belong to our world. He didn't move for a moment, just watched me. Then he stepped closer. From within his cloak he reached out with one long, thin hand. His fingers curled like branches towards my face, and as soon as his skin touched mine, I blacked out. I woke up on the couch in the living room. It was just after dawn. I stood up confused and shuffled back to my bedroom, and as soon as I lay down, the memory of what had happened came back in full force. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed there until I heard my great-grandma cooking in the kitchen. 2 years passed. My great-granddad was gone by then. I was older, but the dreams never stopped. I saw the tall one in them, always silent and always watching. For a while I saw him almost nightly, especially in the weeks after the first night. The second time I encountered him in waking life, it was the same setup. Late night, I got up for a drink. This time it was a Dr. Pepper, and halfway down the hall I stopped. The air was wrong again. The hum in the background and that subtle sense of dread was back. I couldn't go back to bed. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't calm either. It was more like I was being guided, like my choices weren't my own. When I stepped into the living room, he was already there facing me. No smaller figures this time, no smell, but a low humming like a distant generator. His presence was overwhelming. But it wasn't like the first time. He seemed less startled, calmer. He raised one long arm again, and the same thing happened. His hand touched me, and I lost consciousness. Again I woke up on the couch, and again I was left with this lingering feeling of being watched. Over the next few years I never saw him awake again, but the dreams continued. Sometimes they came every few months, sometimes back-to-back nights, and always I woke up sweaty, cold, and terrified. One night I tried to stay up to catch him. I sat in the living room fully awake, just waiting. I never saw him. But I woke up hours later in a bizarre position on my back, legs over the couch, blankets scattered. I don't know what he is. I don't know why me. But I know what I saw. I'm a single dad. My son was born in 2010, and he's easily the most important thing in my life. Because of that, when it comes to memories involving him, everything feels sharper and more vivid. Maybe that's why these strange experiences stick out to me so strongly. They all happen under the same condition, when he sleeps in the same bed as me. Since the very first time he ever curled up beside me at night, weird things have started to happen. Not every night, but enough that I notice a pattern. A window cracked open when I knew it was locked. A nightlight unplugged and lying on the floor. Soft and deliberate sounds that pull me halfway out of sleep. faint shadows or shapes in my peripheral vision as I stir, and always vanish before I can focus. Small things that are easy enough to explain away on their own, but not when they keep happening, and never when I sleep alone. I've chalked it up to coincidence, maybe just poor memory, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. I've had sleep paralysis before, enough to know the difference between the usual terrifying hallucinations and these other moments. These feel different, realer. They don't come with that gut, deep dread, or crushing weight pressing on my chest. Instead, these moments feel calm. So last night was one of these nights. My son had a fever and wasn't feeling great, so I let him sleep in bed with me. I recently switched to working overnights, which means I've become a very light sleeper during the day, and even on nights off. I never really sleep that deeply anymore. I remember glancing over at him just as I was starting to drift off. He'd kick off his blankets, he always does that, hated being too warm, and his pillows had shifted so his head was resting partly on the mattress, which was nothing unusual. I made a mental note to pull the blanket back over him if I woke up again, and at around 3:45, I did wake up, but not because of him. It started with a sound, not loud, but sharp enough to pull me out of sleep instantly. I sat up, something felt off. That's when I noticed my bedroom door was open. I never leave it open. It's one of those subconscious routines. I close it even without thinking about it every night. My eyes adjusted to the dim light spilling from the hallway, and I saw something that jolted me fully awake. There was a hand on the door frame. Just 4 long, slender fingers curled around the edge of the frame. The shape was unmistakable, but not human. They were too long and smooth. My breath caught, but my body moved on instinct. I swung my legs out of bed to get up, and the hand withdrew in a single fluid motion. Something pulled back from the doorway and I caught a glimpse of what looked like a tail vanishing down the hall. It wasn't running. It didn't stumble or scramble or slam into anything. It just vanished with fast, unnatural grace. I moved fast, heart pounding, stepping out into the hallway. But there was nothing. The house was quiet, but still I checked every room, every corner, even double-checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was secure and there were no signs of break-ins, no loose latches, and nothing disturbed. I came back to the bedroom, unsure of what to expect, but my son was fast asleep. Blankets tucked up around his chest, pillow perfectly placed under his head. His breathing was even and deep, and when I touched his forehead, the fever he had earlier was gone, like it had never been there at all. That's when the feeling hit me. The stillness in the air, not dread, not fear, but something else. Like I was being watched. Like something had been inside my house, something that didn't belong. It might not have been trying to harm us, but it left behind this hollow calm I can't explain. I've got 2 dogs. They sleep in my room every night and neither of them barked, growled, or even twitched. That bothers me more than anything. I trust those dogs, they react to everything. But what this was, it came and went without stirring them at all. I've told myself it was just another dream, just my brain misfiring from years of sleep deprivation and odd shifts. But I was awake fully, and I know the difference between a dream and what I saw. And I keep coming back to the same question. Why does it only happen when my son sleeps beside me? Every time it happens, it's always the same, some quiet anomaly, like I've said before. Once during a bad winter, I woke up to find his humidifier turned on. I hadn't touched it, and his stuffed animal positioned neatly under his arm, like someone had tucked it there. Still, he never stirred. I haven't drunk in years, and don't use anything heavier than the occasional joint when I'm out camping with old friends, and I wasn't using anything last night. My mental health is solid. I've had the occasional sleep paralysis episode, sure, but this wasn't that. And this wasn't a terrifying nightmare either. It was something else. I've started to think that maybe whatever is in my house, if it even is in the house, is tied to my son in some way. It never comes for me, it never threatens, it just shows up. When he's here, and only then. And every time it does something small, something careful, something helpful. So now I'm left with this question. Should I be worried? I'm not scared for myself, I've lived with weird things before, but I'm his dad and have to protect him. And don't know if this thing, whatever it is watching over him or watching him. I used to be all in on the mainstream scientific approach to everything. If Richard Dawkins said it, it was gospel. If Neil deGrasse Tyson had an opinion, I echoed it without question. My curiosity and critical thinking were on autopilot. I was a lemming, blindly following the voices of authority in science. Then one day something happened, and from that moment forward, the world started to get stranger. It was a hot August day in Massachusetts, the air thick with a hazy smog from wildfires burning in Canada. I was heading home with my buddy Giovanni, when, as we were about to step inside through the back patio door, Gio suddenly stopped me. What the hell is that? At first I didn't see anything, but as I followed the direction of his pointing finger, I spotted it. A small black dot, hovering just above the treetops in the backyard. It was moving towards us at a slow, steady pace. As it got closer, maybe 25 to 30 feet above our heads, we could see it more clearly. It was black, but had this strange brownish-purple sheen, almost like oil on water, and it floated like a bubble. But that wasn't the strangest part. The air around it looked warped, as if space itself was bending around the object like an Einstein ring in those images of black holes. It wasn't just drifting aimlessly either, it had intent. When it reached a power line, it adjusted, moving back and over it. When a tree branch was in its path, it dipped under, then backed up again. It floated over the neighbor's house and continued on its way, disappearing into the distance. That was the first crack in my worldview, and things only got stranger from there. I moved to another state, and that's when the truly unexplainable started happening. I watched as a baby gate shut itself. A greyish, shadowy hand pushed it closed, though no one else was there. I saw another UFO, this time with my wife and kids beside me. Then, I had a near-death experience. After waking from surgery, my blood pressure plummeted and my heart stopped. In that moment, I experienced something I can't fully put into words. A light, an overwhelming sense of love, a complete understanding of everything. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination, it was real. Since then, my life has been filled with coincidences too precise to ignore, too perfect to just be chance. And I've come to one conclusion. Scientists and academics don't know anything about our reality. Sure, they know what they can measure, what they can calculate, but you can't put love in a test tube. You can't quantify the soul. Too many of them, after spending 8 years obsessing over a single narrow discipline, become so arrogant that they dismiss anything outside their tiny bubble of expertise. They mock what they don't understand because it wasn't something their tenured professor taught them while they were still figuring out how to clear up their acne. We have to experience the world for ourselves, and think for ourselves. So those of you who always told me there was more to existence than science could explain, to the believers, to the experiences of ones who knew, this is my apology. You were right, all along. During the summer of 2012, and having just graduated primary school, my 6 friends and I ventured almost every day to the exact same place along the outskirts of town. We had found a field with a small adjoining wooded area, and it very quickly became our brand new den. We spent most of our days climbing trees, playing tag and hide and seek. At the very end of our den was a 4 feet wide creek, separating the field we played in from the town's rugby club that also was on the outskirts of town. The reason I bring this creek up is because my friends and I, upon discovering it, would also spend a lot of our time there that summer. We enjoyed playing this juvenile game where one of us had to leap over the embankment to the other side or cross via a narrow wooden plank we found to make a bridge. Being the attention seeker I was at that age, I was always willing to jump up and over to the other side. In fact, I was the best at it. Almost anyone else who tried mostly ended up with 1 foot in less than sanitary water. Several months later, however, and nearly halfway through our first year at secondary school, our tradition of jumping creeks and field hide-and-seek had sadly become far less frequent with the ongoing school year. That was until one afternoon. My friends and I ventured back to our den in the nearby creek, crossing over and entering behind the grounds of the rugby club. These grounds consisted of 2 large rugby fields and a smaller patch of grass by the side, which is where the creek had led us. What the 5 or 6 of us were doing there, I'm not sure. We did sometimes use the grounds to play tag or hide-and-seek. Other times we just explored. But what I remember next from that afternoon, in whichever autumn month it was that we caught sight of something flying in the not-too-distant sky and heading directly our way. At first we thought it was nothing more than an aeroplane or Royal Air Force craft, as our town had them passing the sky on a regular basis. The closer this thing got, however, the more it started to look like something else, something that none of us had probably ever seen. It started to look like what our juvenile, imaginative minds could only interpret as an alien spacecraft of some kind. Whatever this thing was, it was still coming our way and flying curiously low. As close as it was now, I think we were all waiting for this craft to visually clarify for us if it was some kind of plane. But what I can still remember vividly is this thing being directly over our heads, and my next thought while looking up at it was that it was a UFO. Before any other thought could enter my mind, whether it be one of awe, dread, or panic, I heard one of my friends a meter or 2 behind me shout, "Crap!" And by the time I look behind me, all I see is every one of my friends running away towards the embankment of the creek. It was as though they were running for their lives. If I recall, it was just me and my friend George who didn't. I'm sure I thought of running too, but I must have been in such awe or disbelief at what I was seeing, and even if I did run, I thought it was sure to abduct me. Whether I ran or stood right where I was, I felt convinced there was nothing I could really do. If it was going to take me, it would. When I turned from my friends to look back up at what I see to be an alien craft, what I see instead is some kind of low-flying military jet, turned slightly away from us now and flying off. My friends also must have noticed it was just a military jet, as they stopped running and now joined slowly back with the rest of the group, realizing there was nothing to be afraid of. Although my memory of the following conversation is hazy, we did discuss what we had just seen, with every one of us indeed thinking it was a UFO at the time, only then to realize it was a military jet. I don't remember the conversation going further from there, or what we even did afterwards for that matter. We probably just went back and played football at the park. However, something I discreetly remember to this day is that in the next 2 years that I still knew them, before picking up my things and moving abroad with my family, is that not a single one of us ever talked about the experience again, not even for a laugh. There was no, "Remember when we almost thought we saw a UFO but it was just a plane?" I did drift away from most of these friends by the following year, as we all separated classes in school and played for rival football teams, so perhaps they did talk about the experience without me there. In my last year before moving abroad, however, I did reacquaint myself with my best friend Kai, who was there that day at the rugby club. We had a drama class together that year, and it was in these lessons that we learnt all about these terrifying urban legends, in which the class afterwards had to dramatically perform them. It was also from these lessons that Kai and myself became obsessed with urban legends, so much that we would watch scary videos about them. But in that same year, enjoying being scared together, not once, to my recollection, did either of us bring up that recollection of the rugby club. Kai was one of my friends I saw run away that day. He was obviously scared by the craft as well, but I never brought it up either. In fact, I think I almost forgot about the whole experience, just like my first experience a year prior to it. But what's even crazier to me is that I seem to forget about both of these experiences, regardless of what they were for the next 10 years. If you're wondering why I'm talking about this second experience, even though it only turned out to be a military jet, it's because since recollecting my first experience recently and becoming acquainted with UFO lore and history, some things about that day no longer add up to me. Number one, if it was an RAF jet and it was flying dangerously low, potentially only 100 feet above us, from what I researched, RFA jets can fly as low as 100 feet, but when it comes to populated areas containing vehicles and civilians, they cannot go lower than 500. If this was a jet, it may not have even seen my friends and I, but it was still flying in and around a populated town. The second point, I'm 100% convinced that this craft flying over me was an alien craft, 100 feet or so above me, and that is what I believed I was seeing. It was only when I looked to my friends running away and then back again did I realize it was somehow a military jet. And perhaps the most confusing aspect of this experience is that the RAF jet, from my recollection, barely made any noise whatsoever. From what I've read and witnessed since then, RAF jets, at only 25 meters after takeoff, are so loud it can even rupture your eardrums. Like I said, this jet was no more than 160 feet above us, yet I could still hear my friends cuss behind me. Having recently fallen down the UFO rabbit hole in the past year, I did come across one video, whether real or hoax, of a spinning, bright yellow light in the sky clear as day that slowly morphed into a standard airliner. Although in that video the transition took the better part of a minute, I then wondered if the craft I saw could have possibly done the same thing. However, when I previously shared my experiences online only several months ago, one person rationally suggested that the craft I saw could have been in fact the Avro Vulcan VH558, which was active around 2012 and based at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, not far from where I lived. It is indeed a very odd-looking craft, with wings resembling something that you might see out of Star Trek. Now, if you ask me, in the year of 2025, if what I saw in 2012 was either a UFO or simply a jet, for the sake of rationality, I would say it was a jet, whose strange appearance merely confused a group of 12-year-old boys. However, to conclude the speculation of this second experience, I will leave you with this. Not long after sharing my experience, an online user advised me to share my story with a specific UFO investigator who particularly focused on UFO activity in the Yorkshire area. Feeling in need of answers, I emailed this very same investigator. Intrigued by my story, he requested a conversation over the phone with me, and after replaying this experience with him, highlighting how the jet was supposedly flying dangerously low without producing much sound at all, he simply told me it was not a military craft. I'll leave the interpretation down to you, but I remember what I saw. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of creepy cryptid stories. Be sure to let me know your favorite down below, and if you would like some really awesome exclusive perks, as well as a bunch of cool additional benefits, feel free to check out the link to Patreon, link down there in the description. But that's all from me. I just want to give one final thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. But until next time, friends, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.